I have a very special guest joining me now. It's Scott Ritter, none other than Scott Ritter. He's a former United Nations weapons inspector. He's former Marine Corps intelligence, author, analyst. He does everything, and I think he's the person to talk to about this. So, Scott, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Doing fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for coming on such short notice. It's not like there's a war breaking out or anything. I mean, it isn't a laughing matter, though. This is very serious, and I just wanted to get your initial reaction on this limited operation or special operation that Putin called it in Ukraine's Donbass region.
Well, first of all, there's nothing limited about this. This is an all-out invasion of Ukraine. We've already have reports of Russian troops taking the city of Mariupol. It's supposed to be the hardest fought. That's where the Azov battalion is. Less than an hour, the city fell. Russian troops have landed in Odessa. Russian tanks are pouring out of Crimea and pouring down towards Kharkov, and it's all over. I mean, this is a massive operation, and the Ukrainian military is not up to the task. Right now, I feel bad for these guys because they've been led to believe that they can fight the Russians. They've had NATO trainers there. They've received, so-called lethal weapons. Those lethal weapons were in warehouses. Those warehouses are destroyed right now. I've just watched the explosions. They're gone. Any Ukrainian who tries to use a Javelin missile will be dead the second they try to use it. But they can't communicate. They can't move. They can't do anything. All they can do is surrender or die. That's the reality of it. This is an operation that will demilitarize Ukraine.
Well, Putin, in his announcement, he said that it's limited, and he said it's just in the Donbass region. You said it's not limited. I was just about to show clips of explosions in Kiev or Kiev, however it's pronounced. I've
been pronounced Kiev from now on.
Right. Yeah. They differ from Russian to Ukrainian. Right. So he's been saying it's limited. You're saying it's not. I mean, who are we supposed to believe here? Because the Western media, I mean, they said he's going to invade for a long time now, right? And even when he sent the so-called peacekeepers the other day, they called that an invasion as well. The White House called it an invasion. So it was the invasion 2 days ago, or is it today? Or is it both?
Look, I just, I let the facts speak for themselves. You're going to see paratroopers in Kiev. They already have paratroopers in Odessa. Naval infantry has taken Mariupol, and the tanks are pouring in. Call it what you want. That's just what it is. That's the reality. He said it was a limited operation for Donbass, but he also said that they're going to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. That means two things. One, the Ukrainian military will cease to exist. There will be no Ukrainian military when this is finished. And two, the Ukrainian government's gone because it's a Nazi regime. Not because I say so, but because President Putin has labeled it as such. And, this is a Russian operation. We in the West can sit back there and shake our heads, wag our fingers. It doesn't matter. The reality is made by Russia, and that reality is transpiring on the ground right now. Afterwards, we can dissect it and criticize it, et cetera. But, right now, I just let the facts speak for themselves. And the facts are Russia is overrunning Ukraine as we speak.
Right. I mean, he said that those exact words, that he wants to denazify Ukraine. He said something along the lines of, "Your ancestors fought the Nazis. How dare you collaborate with them now or become neo-Nazis?" I didn't get the exact translation. We haven't had a proper one yet, but. Yeah, so what does he mean by that? It's not just the Azov battalion. It's beyond that. It's the entire Ukrainian military, as you said. Is that what's being labeled Nazi now?
I don't want to denigrate the entire Ukrainian military. I'm sure that it's staffed by professional officers and soldiers who believe in the defense of Ukraine, but they've allowed themselves to be infiltrated by a radical right-wing nationalistic element whose loyalties are to a Ukrainian nationalist named Bandera, who fought on the side of the Nazis during World War II. Yep. They've torn down memorials to the Soviet liberators. from World War II, and instead they've put up monuments celebrating Ukrainians who fought for the 12th SS Panzer Division. SS Panzer Division.
Yep.
I mean, it doesn't get any more Nazi than that. And so, there's two categories of Nazis in Ukraine. There are those who are actual Nazis, and there's thousands of them. And there's those who tolerate it, who are facilitators of this radical right-wing hateful ideology. And, we in the West can sit here and go, well, come on, don't overreact. It's not that big of a deal. For the Russians, it's a huge deal. 30 million dead is a big deal. Yeah. This resonates with the Russian psyche in a way that no one in the West will understand or comprehend. So while there's a temptation in the West to say, this is just Putin exaggerating, this is Putin making a mountain out of a molehill, no, it's not. It needs to be taken seriously. It should have been taken seriously. I think there's a lot of people waking up right now understanding that maybe we should have listened more carefully to what the Russian president was saying. And had we listened and taken action, this war could have been prevented. But now it's too late. The war's on, and Ukraine as we know it is never going to exist again.
Well, I mean, that SS division that you were mentioning, I know of it because they massacred a village in France, right? Oradour. A very, very powerful a poem. And of course, my grandfather fought in World War II, RAF. So that's always resonated with me. And the Russians lost much more than we did, Brits and Americans. So I agree with you. It's a much more potent thing for them. But when you say that this is all because, the West hasn't listened to Russia's demands or Russia's concerns, the big elephant in the room here is NATO expansion, right? Do you think, I'm just going to ask you very, straight up, very clearly, do you think that this could have been avoided if, Ukraine had come out and said, we're not going to join NATO, or the West had said, we're not going to accept Ukraine, and that's final?
Yes, this war would not be happening if that had happened. You see, that creates room for a diplomatic settlement, because there's still a lot of problems between Russia and the West. But the big one, the one that was an existential threat to Russia, was Ukraine becoming a NATO member. Now, people are going to say, well, wait a minute. Even though the open door policy, Ukraine wasn't going to become a member for 10 years. That's what Germany was saying. This isn't going to happen for at least 10 years. So why the urgency? There's membership and then there's de facto membership. Okay, right now, what was happening in Ukraine was that NATO was pouring in billions of dollars of weaponry. They were sending in hundreds and thousands of trainers who were training Ukrainian military to become a de facto proxy of NATO. I mean, Ukraine had already been a proxy of NATO. They deployed troops to Iraq. They deployed troops to Afghanistan. They were training to NATO standards. Right. So from a Russian perspective, it doesn't matter if you're a NATO member, you're acting as if you were a NATO member. And therefore, Russia said, stop, cease and desist. We don't tolerate it. And they made it a red line. Now, in the United States, we've become accustomed to presidents drawing red lines and then ignoring them. Well, Putin drew a red line. There's no ignoring this. He's acting on it. And like I said, it's time for the West to wake up. It doesn't mean we surrender. I mean, the last thing anybody should do right now is say we're going to give Russia everything they want, because that's not how you react after something of this magnitude. You don't, let the tiger think he can eat everybody in the room, but you don't want to go to war either. There needs to be, the West needs to establish some serious red lines like the Polish border, the Romanian border, the Baltic states, and be prepared to defend them with force if necessary. And, the West is having a major wake-up call because NATO has allowed its military capability to rock for the last 20 years. The United States has been killing goat herders and kicking down doors in Iraq. We can't fight the war that's being that's taking place right now. What the Russians are doing is just stunning. The Russians are unleashing the kind of hell that a modern combined arms military is capable of doing. NATO's got nothing that can stand up to this right now. And this is a wake-up call to NATO. If you want to take on Russia, okay, but put on your big boy pants, put the dollars down, and rebuild your military. Otherwise, it might be time for you to think about maybe we need to listen to what Russia's saying, because Russia doesn't want to take over Europe. This isn't the Soviet Union. They're not driving to the Rhine. They do want NATO, however, to withdraw to their pre-1997 borders, at least the military. They're not saying that Poland and the Baltic states can't be NATO members. What they're saying is no German forces, no American forces, no British forces, no non-Polish or Baltic state NATO forces can be in those states. Pull them back. Get rid of the anti-ballistic missile, so-called anti-ballistic missile capability in Poland and Romania. And before everybody was just yawning, oh, that's just the Russians overreaching. I don't think anybody's yawning anymore. Putin has always said to people, you don't listen to me when I speak. And he had a famous speech where he showed the Russian nuclear capabilities. He said, are you listening to me now? Well, guess what? Putin's sending a giant wake-up call saying, are you listening to me now? And hopefully the West is listening.
I mean, you said, you made an interesting point, though. I've seen you saying that NATO's not ready. They just don't have the same capability, and they haven't been training for the same things the Russians have. You said, though, that the West, I think this goes to the crux of the issue that Putin was talking about, because you said that the West must define the borders in Eastern Europe. I mean, Putin is saying that people in Eastern Europe and Russia should define their own borders. He was talking about how, Ukraine was basically Russia, and that it was created by Russia, and they're united and such. And he doesn't seem to think the same. He doesn't want the West defining Europe's borders, right? I mean,
he doesn't want the West defining Slavic borders. He rejected, for instance, the effort by the European Union to dictate the outcome of the August 2020 election in Belarus. He opposed efforts by NATO and the EU to support Belarusian opposition figures. And what we've seen now is that he is permanently transferred the First Guards Tank Army to Belarusian soil. So he's guaranteeing that Belarus will be a Slavic state aligned with Moscow. And he's doing the same thing with Ukraine right now. He is eliminating, terminating all pro-Western structures. I mean, if you're
NATO
one of these,
or otherwise,
he's the Nazis. All those hard, nationalistic elements that operate out of Lvov, they're gone. They'll either die, be arrested, or they're going to flee to Poland. I think we're going to see a large expatriate population residing in Poland for the next 100 years, because they're not coming back to Ukraine. It's over. I don't know how to be more definitive than that. The reality of Ukraine as we knew it, and I've warned about this all along. I said, if Ukraine doesn't understand what's about to happen to it, it's going to cease to exist as a modern nation state as it's currently configured. And that's true. It's done. And so, Russia is defining the Slavic borders. And we may see some action with the Transnistria region in Moldova, now that Russia is going to expand to into Ukraine. There are some I think there's some shared borders there, and that may become part of the greater Slavic family as well. But Russia's not going to dictate, for instance, the eastern border of Poland, or we got to be careful here with the Baltics. And this is why NATO needs to grow a spine right now, because there are some large Russian-speaking populations in the Baltic states that are being oppressed by the Estonians, the Latvians, the Lithuanians. And, Russia may feel emboldened by what's happening right now and seek to flex its muscle up north. That gets a little bit more dangerous and tricky. And it's important for the West, for NATO, not to show too much weakness, because right now they're just impotent. I mean, this is pathetic. This is truly pathetic. And I'm glad, because I don't want a war between NATO and Russia. But the fact of the matter is, we've got this transatlantic alliance that's been walking around as if they're the big man on the block, and we find out really they're just pathetic. They're an overweight little pudgy bully in the recess yard who is finding out that just about anybody can kick his butt.
Well, I mean, I was talking about this before, that the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So I mean, NATO's original purpose stated or otherwise, is kind of defunct now. But just getting back to what's happening, I mean, what's unfolding right now as we're speaking in Ukraine, you were saying that it is an invasion. The Russian military is saying that they're only doing targeted strikes. And I mean, who are we to believe now? Because if we look at what the US did, for example, in Syria in 2018, no one was calling that an invasion. Obviously, it was to a much smaller scale. But I mean, the initial reaction wasn't to say immediately it's an invasion. There are many other things, drone strikes, other so-called precision strikes that have gone on in Pakistan, for example. No one ever said that the U.S. invaded Pakistan. Can we say that what's happening right now in Ukraine from the Russians is really an invasion, or it's just going to be limited strikes, and then they're going to keep their peacekeepers or whatever they're calling them in the Donbass? What do you think?
It doesn't matter what I think. It's what the facts are, and the facts are unfolding as we speak. Meaning that I don't know. Nobody knows. We'll know sometime tomorrow. I mean, if the 76th Airborne Division lands in Kiev at the airport and drives its vehicles into Kiev proper to seize the government facilities, that's an invasion.
Yeah, obviously.
If Russian naval infantry are disembarking in Odessa, as rumors have it, that's an invasion. So we'll find out soon enough. Right now it's the fog of war. We simply just don't know.
The thing I wanted to ask you about is the point of contention in international law, because the Russians are saying that they're recognizing LPR and DPR under the right to self-determination. They're using that argument under international law. And then the West and NATO are saying that Russia's violating Article 2, Paragraph 4, territorial integrity of Ukraine. How do you reconcile these two? Who's right in this case?
Well, this is where international lawyers come in. I mean, we saw the same kind of, ridiculous discussion going on when the United States went into Iraq, as to whether it was an invasion or it was, a necessary operation to get rid of weapons of mass destruction. It was an invasion. It was an invasion. End of story. The Russians, of course, can't come right out and say we're violating international law. No nation's going to say that.
Right.
So they're going to develop a line of legalistic argumentation that paints what they're doing differently. They should be able to do it. I mean, look, Putin's already said that the government that's in Kiev is an illegitimate government. It came into power from a coup. He's used some very crafty language when referring to them, not as an official government, but as those who came into power from an illegal coup, et cetera. So by doing that, you eliminate legitimacy on the part of the Ukrainian government. And so what you have instead is a Nazi regime, an illegal regime, and maybe through an expansion of peacekeeping, it's necessary to eliminate that. I'll let the Russian diplomats and lawyers twist this any way they want to. But I think if we're going to condemn the United States for violating international law through the invasion of Ukraine or of Iraq, we have to be consistent. It doesn't mean that Russia is evil. Doesn't mean anything. It just means that international law it doesn't know how to deal with an institution like NATO. I mean, NATO exists outside the framework of the United Nations Charter. NATO exists outside the framework of international law. Where were all these people who were concerned about international law when NATO created the nation state of Kosovo, stripping it away from the Serbian nation because some Albanian Kosovars said, we want to be independent? Well, Russia took that, and Putin at the time said, you guys are making a horrible mistake. This is going to come back and bite you. Well, it just did, because Russia used the exact same playbook to create Lugansk and Donetsk, the exact same playbook. So no one in the West can literally have any credibility. And then where was the world when the United States invaded Iraq? Where was the world? Where was the condemnation? Where was the angst and the anxiety? Russia just took the same playbook and they're doing it better. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Russia is operating in total conformity with international law. They're not. What I am going to say is that international law, as it's currently configured, is not up to the task of dealing with the situation. Because if Russia were to abide strictly by international law, then NATO would get away with everything that Russia says represents an existential threat to their existence.
And Putin is saying he's saying that our objective is not to occupy Ukraine. Do you believe that he's right? What about the Minsk agreements? What of the Minsk agreements? Are those even relevant anymore?
Well, Minsk is no longer relevant. I mean, the Ukrainians had 7 years to save their country. They opted out, partly because the United States, Germany, France, Great Britain didn't put enough pressure on them, and indeed, in the end, took the Ukrainian side saying that, well, Minsk is unfair. Well, then you shouldn't have signed it. But the bottom line is you needed to implement Minsk. It was only too late. I mean, watching Tony Blinken speak before the United Nations Security Council, and we are pushing the Ukrainians to implement Minsk. Well, the Ukrainians turned around and said, we're not going to do it. Okay, you made your bed. Now you got to sleep in it. That means that you don't exist anymore. Minsk is gone. Now that doesn't mean that there can't be a new Minsk afterwards. I mean, when this is all said and done, I do believe that the Russians don't want to occupy Ukraine. That would be a disaster. Mm-hmm. The last thing the Russians want to do is create the legitimacy for an insurgency. They're going to terminate this government. They're going to demilitarize Ukraine, and then they're going to put in place a new government that will create a new military that is more along the lines of the Belarusian military, meaning that it will cooperate with the Russian military, etc. But Russian troops will secure the Ukrainian border for a while, but they're not going to occupy Ukraine. I believe that because that's not in Putin's interest. But Ukraine is not going to exist like it currently exists. That Ukrainian ambassador to the UN raising hell and havoc right now, he's gone. Right. He represents a dead government. That government's gone. There will be a new government, a new constitution, a new conception of what Ukraine is. And what Ukraine will be is part of this, it'll be a Slavic rump state that is subordinated to the will of Moscow, much like Belarus is.
Well, what do you think is going to happen next? I know this is pure speculation, but just given the situation that NATO is in, the state that it's in, we do have still 5 countries surrounding Russia, 5 NATO countries. Someone might ask, what's the point of just going after Ukraine? You're already surrounded. It's too late. Do you think that Putin is just trying to create leverage in order to get NATO, not just to forswear Ukraine, but to, as we mentioned, to not deploy NATO troops in the neighboring countries? Do you think that that's the goal here, is that I'm going to take control of this border area now until you back off?
The goal is set forth in 2 draft treaties that Russia provided the United States and NATO back in December. That's the goal. Yeah. I mean, there's no secret here. There's no mystery. There's no, what is Putin thinking? It's not, first of all, let's stop talking about what Putin's thinking. It's about what Russia's thinking. And Russian national security interests require that Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO. Now, Ukraine had an opportunity to become a neutral state. They opted out of that opportunity. Now they're going to become a pro-Russian rump state. But they're never going to be part of NATO. And that is the new reality. The other reality, I think there's going to be 2 realities that emerge from this. One, I think that this military operation is going to be over in less than a week. I think it's going to be one of the most decisive military victories in the history of modern warfare.
Why do you think that?
Because the Ukrainian army can't fight and the Russian army is vastly superior. The Russians have a plan, they're acting on it, and it's unfolding at lightning speed. So this is going to be over in less than a week. That's my opinion. Now, you can call me back in a week when the Russian army's bogged down outside of Dnipropetrovsk and the Ukrainians have launched valiant counterattacks surrounding the 20th Combined Arms Army, taking thousands of Russian prisoners. Okay, then I'll eat my tie. But I don't think that's going to happen. Right now, as I've said, the Ukrainian military can't talk. All their communications are jammed. All their command posts have been destroyed. The soldiers are cold, alone in the field, and surrounded. And they're either going to die or they're going to surrender. That's what's happening right now. We're either seeing a lot of dead Ukrainian soldiers or a lot of surrendering. And I'm betting you a dime to a dollar that Russia's going to process far more prisoners of war than they're processing dead Ukrainians. It's over. And because this is going to be such a decisive, one-sided battle, NATO is going to wake up to the fact that, we can't talk about military confrontation with Russia. We can talk about defending ourselves, but we need to recognize that in order to challenge Russia, we will have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars that we don't have. We don't have. NATO has stopped spending money on defense. And the other thing they're going to realize while this debate about rebuilding their military capability is unfolding, these sanctions are going to be kicking in. And some of these sanctions are going to target, Russian gas. If they shut off the SWIFT banking system, as soon as they shut off SWIFT, Russia shuts off gas and oil.
That's something I wanted to ask you about.
It's all over for Europe at that point.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think the military response, but also the they like to call it non-military, the sanctions? What is the response going to be now from the Biden administration, from NATO, and the West in general? They certainly are not going to start sending U.S. troops there, are they?
No. I mean, you hear some ridiculous talk about, from the Ukrainian ambassador about NATO invoking Article 4. And, and he wants NATO to come to the rescue, even though they don't get Article 5 protection, the collective defense. Article 4, they can deploy NATO troops to protect a friend and ally. Just not going to happen. NATO is going to realize that to rebuild their military is going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. While they're having that discussion, though, they're going to be implementing additional sanctions. There's no doubt in my mind that tomorrow today, we're going to see a tremendous number of very serious sanctions being imposed. And given the gravity of the situation and the decisiveness of the Russian action, I think we're going to, the SWIFT, shutting down SWIFT may be on the table. It's a suicide pill, though. If you shut down SWIFT, you're going to collapse the global energy security. The oil prices are going to go through the roof. Energy prices are going to go through, and Europe's going to shut down. Their economy will collapse. I think you're in Vienna, Austria, right?
You see the UN behind me.
Yeah, 90% of Austria's energy comes from Russia.
It does.
Good luck. Your power plants are going to shut down, and you're going to be living in the dark. It's going to be the cold ages. Germany's going to freeze. The winter ain't over. And then it's not just that. People say, well, it's only 40%. Well, I mean, you take away 40% of capacity in a Western-oriented economy where everything operates on a razor-thin edge of efficiency. There is no fat in the West. They produce things, they bring it to market, and they put it on the shelves, and it's sold. And then they produce it again. If that system gets disrupted, supply chains break down and nothing works. Nothing's going to work in Europe very soon if they implement these sanctions. And Russia has been preparing for this for years. They've lowered their debt. They've built up their reserves. They have gold reserves, foreign reserves. Their sovereign fund is vibrant. And they've started working with other nations to have economic relations that bypass SWIFT. So it's just the West that's committing suicide by doing this. And so I think Russia will be able to wait out the sanctions. And the interesting thing about Europe is there's all these democratically elected officials right now who are destroying the economic well-being of their constituents. James Carville, a famous Democratic presidential consultant, said when Bill Clinton was originally running for president, it's the economy, stupid. That's all a politician needs to worry about. It's the economy. You have a good economy, you get reelected. You have a bad economy, you're out of office. Well, all of these democratically elected officials who have opted to go down the path of sanctions are going to be voted out of office because they're destroying the economic well-being of their constituents, and their constituents are not going to be happy. This was a war that could have been avoided had the West not been stupid and stubborn and inconsiderate of legitimate Russian concerns. It's not me being pro-Putin, pro-Russian. One only has to refer to the 2009 memorandum written by William Burns, then the U.S. ambassador to Moscow, today the CIA director. He wrote a memorandum after the 2008 Bucharest summit, where NATO invited Ukraine and Georgia to become members. And he wrote it, it said, "Niet means niet," meaning no means no. The Russians said, no, this is a red line. And he said, this is serious. The Russians are dead serious about this. And it's a legitimate concern. That was the other thing he said. You know, we should not give this short shrift. We should pay attention to this, because this is a red line, which if we ignore will come back to haunt us. He said that in 2009. People should have listened to him, because had we listened to him, we wouldn't be in the situation today. We wouldn't have sought to invite, you know, people have to feel sorry for Ukraine and Georgia. They've been dangled the false promise of NATO membership. They will never be NATO members, ever. They don't qualify, and Russia will never let it happen. And so NATO, instead of recognizing reality, speaks of an open door policy. There is no open door policy. Read Article 10 of the NATO Charter. Article 10 says that if a nation in Europe qualifies for membership and applies for membership, then NATO will consider it only if inclusion improves the security of the NATO alliance. There's not a single person who can articulate how Ukraine and Georgia's membership in NATO improves NATO's alliance, especially when Russia has said, if you do this, it'll put us in conflict with you. So this is just a falsehood that's been propagated by the Secretary General of NATO, by Tony Blinken, by Biden, and by others. There is no open door policy. It doesn't exist. It's a fiction. Had NATO simply done what its charter tells it to do, they would have reflected on the fact that neither Ukraine nor Georgia improves their security posture. Therefore, they will be precluded from membership, even if they resolved, for instance, their internal territorial problems, which exclude them from consideration right off the bat. I mean, as long as Russia's in Crimea, theoretically, Ukraine could never be a member, because the second Ukraine becomes a member and they seek to resolve their territorial conflict, Article 5 kicks in, NATO finds itself at war. This is why neither Georgia nor Ukraine improve the security posture of NATO. It's just a false premise. And Ukraine has been sacrificed on this hill. I mean, it's sad. It's very sad.
Yeah, it's certainly been used as a pawn, you could argue, and that's kind of putting it mildly. Just as a last question, Scott, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but what do you think of the way that NATO has been, interacting with the world? Because honestly, if you look at the most recent accomplishments, it's provoking a Russian invasion, whatever you want to call it, into Ukraine. We'll see in the morning. Destroying Libya, Syria. A lot of people think NATO should be abolished at this point because the Soviet Union doesn't exist. It doesn't serve any purpose. Do you agree with that view?
100%. I mean, NATO lost its reason to exist when the Cold War ended, when the Soviet Union collapsed, when the Warsaw Pact disintegrated. There was no reason to have NATO. Its reason for existing had disappeared. But instead of recognizing this and doing the right thing, and abiding, for instance, by the promise they gave to Gorbachev, the Soviet president, that Gorbachev said, guys, never forget, I got 400,000 troops in East Germany, and I can stop German unification on a dime. If you want to go down that route. But I'm in favor of stability, so I'll go along with German unification. I'll withdraw my troops, but if I do so, you have to agree not only not to bring NATO troops into the eastern portion of Germany, but you can't bring NATO troops east of the Elbe. You can't go into Poland. You can't do this. And he was given assurances, and everybody said, well, it's just verbal. We now found out it's in writing, that this wouldn't happen. So right off the bat, we have an expansive NATO. Now, NATO says, that's okay. You don't be worried about an expansive NATO because we're a defensive alliance. Really? Then why did they bomb Belgrade in 1999? There was nothing defensive about that. That was offensive military action against a Slavic state. Why did they Why did NATO send a training mission to Iraq in 2004? Why did NATO members participate in the illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003? They say, well, it's just a training mission. No, it's a training mission in an occupied state that was occupied, from an illegal war of aggression. So you're facilitating, you're legitimizing an illegal war of aggression. That's what NATO did. Why did NATO go into Afghanistan? What business is Afghanistan of NATO's? None. Zero. And what did NATO do to Libya? Offensive, aggressive military operations. But it's not just these examples. It's a transatlantic organization. Why then did they start a partnership in North Africa where they were seeking to expand their sphere of influence? There's a word we're not allowed to use in North Africa. Why did they set up offices in the United Arab Emirates to create a sphere of influence in the Persian Gulf? Why are they talking about a North Atlantic Treaty Organization operating in the Pacific to create a sphere of influence to counter China? They're not a defensive organization. It's an offensive-minded, expansive organization with a proven history of carrying out regime change operations in countries they view as a threat. Who is the number one threat to NATO today, per NATO's own words? Russia. So, NATO not only has no reason to exist, NATO is a suicide pill for Europe. And it's high time Europe recognizes that. And I think one of the byproducts of this current crisis, this debacle, this tragedy, whatever you want to call it in Ukraine, because there's nothing good about it. I mean, I'm happy the Nazis are being kicked out and that, but there's nothing good about what's happening. This is a human tragedy of a horrendous scale. But the one thing that can come out of this is maybe Europe will wake up that there is no legitimate reason to continue the NATO alliance, and that maybe people like Macron can start putting forward this concept of a new European security framework that respects Russia's spheres of influence.
Well, Scott, you put it very meticulously. Thank you for coming on the program on such short notice. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, former Marine Corps intelligence officer, author, analyst. And I will put your Twitter up on in a second, and so people can go follow your work online. Thanks so much, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, so we'll be continuing the program. I'll take it from here. Again, that was Scott Ritter. I'm going to put up his social media so you can go follow him. He's really great. You need to understand something, like how important his work is. When the U.S. was trying to invade Iraq in 2002, 2003, and they were seeing Iraq as weapons of mass destruction, the reason we know that Iraq didn't have them anymore is because he was inspecting Iraq. Scott Ritter, who I was just talking to, right? So he was the UN weapons inspector in charge of making sure that Iraq had disarmed. And then Colin Powell goes to the UN and lies, of course, and says Iraq has failed to disarm. Complete nonsense. I'm going to put up his social media. And I did an interview with him on this channel about Iran, and Iran's nuclear program and all of this stuff, the nuclear deal, because he knows his stuff about WMDs. He knows a thing or two, right? So I'll of course continue about Ukraine in a second, right? I'm just pulling this up for you so you can see that. There you go. Make sure you follow him. He's great.